My name is Rick Kober-Bauman, and I'm hosting this evening a behind-the-scenes look at MCC's work, one of the webinars we've been doing over the last few months. We've got people joining us on Zoom and via Facebook Live from multiple countries, so greetings and welcome to you all. So right away, I'd like to invite those of you who've joined us via Zoom to have a look at the bottom of your screen. You can choose the English or Spanish option so that you'll be able to hear the translation that you need throughout the visit. Our presenter, Gabriel, will be presenting in Spanish, so we would like to make sure that you hear everything he has to offer, no matter what language you speak. So thank you for your ongoing support of MCC, for your interest in our work. We are thrilled you're a part of the MCC story and thrilled that we can offer you this unique view of the way that we serve in the name of Christ. As MCC Canada's Executive Director, I'm coming to you from my home here in southwestern Ontario, a little hamlet called Shakespeare, west of Toronto. And I want to say just a little bit now about some logistics. Some of you, this is old hat, but you will remember that if you're on Zoom, participants will be kept muted through the live event. And again, reminder of the English-Spanish translation. So make sure you go to the interpretation button and choose the language you want to be listening in. And if you want to ask a question from Zoom, there's a Q&A function in the black bar at the bottom of your screen. And if you're in Facebook, we would invite you to submit questions too, and you can use the comments section. And we'll be sure to find your question. We've got someone monitoring those, and you can submit them anytime. We probably won't be answering questions throughout. We'll try to deal with those questions at the end, and as many as possible. Sometimes we get such interest and more questions than we can answer. We'll try to get as many as we can, and there is a recording. So if you miss part of it tonight, you will certainly be able to hear the whole presentation following the live presentation. Okay, that's the logistics. Now, what about the topic, gardening for good? So we're calling this a virtual visit. And in it, we want to take a look at what it's like to care for our planet, for God's creation. We're going to go from a backyard setting to rural, far from urban center Bolivian communities. So join us to learn about gardening and conservation tips in your garden, and then we'll hear some remarkable stories from MCC projects in Bolivia. So from Bolivia to your yard, weather patterns are changing. Climate change is a real and a very important topic for us at MCC. We're continuing to hear from our partners around the world how their lives, their food security, their communities are being changed by changing weather, changing climate. But we wanted to do more than only hear stories from partners in Bolivia. We wanted to also give you some actionable steps, some ways that we can work at creation care in our own yards. So we're hoping to build some bridges between what we can do for the environment and what our friends and partners are doing in Bolivia as they make these adaptations. So we have two guests tonight. You're going to hear first from Cami Freed, and Cami is a master naturalist from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Gabriel Chuca, who works with a Bolivian partner of MCC's called PRODI. And we also have a translator, an interpreter. Diana Cruz Celis is also in Bolivia. She's a program monitoring and evaluation and reporting worker for MCC in Bolivia. So I'm going to say just a bit more about our guests, a bit more of a thorough introduction, and then I'm going to hand it off to you, Cami, so you can expect it to be coming your way in just a moment. So again, Cami, a master naturalist, is continuing her studies in environmental biology, and she has a specialization in native plants and meadow installations. And Gabriel Chuca, an agricultural technician, as I said, with our partner PRODI in Bolivia. He was also featured, if you're a regular reader of A Commonplace, the MCC magazine, he was in the first person in the spring edition of 2022. So we look forward to hearing directly from him and gaining the opportunity to have some conversation and ask questions around his work. So again, feel free to send your questions in anytime. We'll give 7 or 10 minutes or so to each of our presenters, and then we'll open it up for conversation. And we do want it to be a conversation tonight. So again, thanks for joining. And Cami, I'm handing it over to you.
Hi, do we have the slides up? Perfect. Hi, so again, yes, I am Cami Freed, and I am going to talk about native plants. And my examples are going to focus really on the East Coast of the United States, but my tips really can be used anywhere in the world. Next slide, please. So location. In the United States, grass and lawn is actually our #1 crop. It is more than corn, wheat, and orchards combined. And lawn and grass has created this monoculture of just one species of plant, and not a lot of things can live in it. So our goal with our backyards is to create these little micro habitats, and you don't have to convert your entire property or entire yard into native plants. You can just do small sections or put a small flower bed in, and it still is going to provide. Also, if you live in an apartment complex or you have a very small yard, if you just only have a balcony or a porch, you can actually plant native plants in pots, and pollinators will still use them, and butterflies will still use them as host plants. And when I say a host plant, this is a plant that a butterfly will lay eggs on, and the caterpillars will eat the plant and then eventually become an adult. A really good example of this is dill. You can plant dill in a pot, and black swallowtail butterflies will come in and use it. So even if you have a small area, you still can provide. Now, the idea behind creating these little islands of habitat is so that pollinators will have places to go and wildlife will have places to go to use the native plants. If you have a yard in, say, a neighborhood, it's really important that if you're using native plants, you make it look like a garden. Don't try and install a real big messy meadow in a very urbanized area with neighbors and neat lawns. This kind of gives native plants a bad name because they start growing tall and falling over, and people perceive them as being weedy. You can avoid this by planting the plants in a flower bed like you normally would with any other flowers, mulching and keeping a nice crisp edge. You can even, if you would like to, remove some of your lawn and put in islands of flowers. Just keep nice mowed paths to really give it that kept and neat look. Next slide, please. So what's the point of using native plants? Well, a native plant is a plant that has been in a location for hundreds or thousands of years, and it's co-evolved with our insects. So our insects have learned to use the native plants. And if you would get a plant from, say, Europe and bring it to the United States, our insects are not going to recognize it as a food source. So planting native plants, the insects recognize it as a food source and they use it. And this is extremely important for songbirds because our songbirds cannot feed seeds to their young. They have to have the insects. So if you plant the plants to feed the insects, you're also feeding the birds. So this is contributing to the food chain, which is really good. And it's also creating an intact ecosystem and keeping our whole food chain moving. Next slide. So another great reason to use native plants is rainwater retention, basically. So if you have a lawn and you notice that somewhere in your lawn, water is pooling after a rainstorm and it just sits there, this is because your lawn is basically a parking lot. When your house was built, the heavy equipment really compacted the soil, and then they put grass or grew grass or either put sod down. And if you've ever seen sod, it has very shallow roots. Native plants tend to have very deep roots. Now, non-native plants will also have very deep roots for some of the species, but the advantage to native plants is that they've also evolved with the weather cycles. So wherever you live, there are certain weather patterns that plants recognize, especially in temperate regions that experience a lot of seasons. You'll see that the plants in the winter will take all of their nutrients into the root system. And when they do this, some of the roots on the outside actually die off. And then in the spring, when all the rains come and fall into that low-lying area, there'll be a lot of holes in the ground for the water to percolate down into the earth. And this is good because when the water is running off of all the lawns and the streets, it's picking up pollutants and it's picking up pesticides and it's picking up all kinds of nasty things. And usually if that rolls off of your lawn, it ends up in a creek and ends up in the ocean. But if you can capture that water, and as it goes in the ground, it'll take all that pollution into the ground and trap it. So rain gardens really kind of trap and clean the water and are really good for the rivers as well. Next slide. So some resources in the United States, wildflower.org will have a lot of information on plants, whether or not they are native or not native. And this will also give you information on the growing conditions and if there are any insects that use the plant as a host plant. Next slide. BONAP is another really great website. This will help show you if the plant occurs in your state and if it can grow in your state. It also shows you if it's native or non-native. You really want to avoid any plants that are showing up in the kind of neon pink purplish color. Those are the ones that are considered noxious weeds and would be an invasive species. Next slide. Prairie Moon is another good resource. They do sell plants. They kind of have a wide variety of plants and lots of information, both West Coast, East Coast, and Midwest in the United States. Next slide. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comment box or on Facebook in the comments. Thanks.
Wow, Cami, thank you. We were talking gardening a little bit as we were gathering before the session tonight. And so I know I'm going to have some questions for you as well. And we're going to come to that. But first, we want to go to our second guest, Gabriel from Bolivia. Now, we were having a few technical challenges, no secret, just before the top of the hour. And I'm not sure if my colleagues have sorted this out. There were a couple of ways we were hoping to bring Gabriel and his slides in. So, Gabriel, are you with us? And Diana in translation, are we ready to go?
Sí, hola.
Hola, welcome, Gabriel.
¿Cómo están? Buenas noches
Good
para
evening for
todos
all of
en
you
el horario
in the
boliviano.
Bolivian time. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Gabriel. I am a technician from Prodi, an MCC's partner. In these moments, I will be sharing with you the experience we are developing in the north of Potosí. So I took as the title of the project that we have been working on with MCC. The name is Building Together Harmonious Lives with Mother Earth in the Moscari and Tacarani microwater catchment in North Potosí. The north of Potosí is one of the most impoverished zones in Bolivia, in which we have been working for about 20 years, many years. Next slide. Well, we do training processes for farmers, as you can see in the images. There you see a group of farmers whom we have been training in different issues regarding climate change, also regarding production, and always considering ancestral knowledge that people have. Participants include farmers, male and female, young people, and through our FLEPI Intercultural Leadership Training School, we educate promoters who are guardians of the biosecurity or the biosecurity of the Pachamama, or said in other words, Pachamama, because they are the ones who will bring development forward. In the same way, we implement family water harvest for producers in different communities of the municipalities of San Pedro, Pocoata, and Chayanta. Here we have some reservoirs that you can see in the pictures. There we accumulate the water, and somehow people get their water supply, and at the same time they have early production, because the area of North Potosí suffers from a lot of hail and freeze brought by climate change. That is why we support these communities and these producers with these water harvests. Next slide. In the same way, we work in the recovery and conservation of native species. In this case, Andean tubers or potatoes. The production is in small spaces that we call microtunnels, in which we use what we call botanical seed, which you can see in the picture, male and female farmers who are carrying out a participatory improvement of the seeds, starting from the ancestral knowledge of our grandparents. They have been using it and developing it. And also their children, their young people have started to get involved, as I was saying before. Next slide. Also, regarding the issue of soil fertility, we are also working on the preparation of bioinputs. And we can see how producers are giving back or supplying some nutrients to the soil, so that this will benefit later production cycles. We are focusing more on agroecological production, in which they use manure, some products made out of native plants of the area that are in this area. Next slide. In the same way, another successful experience that we have is the establishment of gardens or places in which we are producing vegetables to ensure food security, in which we produce a wide variety of vegetables ecologically. This supports livelihoods and food security. But at the same time, what is left is commercialized in the markets that are close to the communities in 3 different municipalities. And in these processes, the whole family participates. That is why we call it family agriculture. Producers from different geographical areas, from different communities. Next slide. In the same way, we are working in the comprehensive management of microwater catchment. And in this case, you can see the Lujo community in the district Cayanas in the municipality of San Pedro, in which we are working in the comprehensive management of the microwater catchment, Charahama. So our intention is to forest that mountain that you see on the left. The idea is to do that. Here, what we call that is water harvest. So that vegetation grows, especially native species. As we can see there is also Rariata pine. And the idea is to collect water. And as you see in the images, it is very devoid of vegetation. And when it rains, the water that comes runs off to the water, to the river. And our initiative will allow that water don't go straight to the river, but instead it will allow that the soil retains water. And that the water infiltrates. In this area there are many water streams, and from them the idea is for them to be useful in the future, and most likely we will harvest water. And this will allow us to complement what we have said before, vegetable production, among others. Here you can see the producers who are part of this process of caring, of contributing a little bit to contributing to Pachamama or Mother Earth. Sometimes we talk about responsibility, and we are co-responsible as well of the well-being of Pachamama. Next slide. We work on peri-urban agriculture or backyard farming. As I was telling you previously, it is developed under a family model as a small laboratory in the backyard of our homes. For example, my wife, my children participate. There we carry out tests, and then we implement that in the communities. We are producing forest trees, cacti, and in the same way we produce vegetables that we consume ourselves, or we share them with some family members. In the same way, in our backyards, we work on apiculture, and we raise bees as pollinating agents. This is important since if there were no bees, there would be no pollination, and I don't know what would be of human life. That is what we could say. Next slide. Well, in the same way, I want to show you an area in San Pedro district in the community called Pampoyocchi. And here you can see the carrot production, directing it towards what is the market. Besides ensuring food security, we are also focusing production on marketing to generate some income for the families. Well, that's what I could say. We are always working for the well-being of the communities. And thank you. If you have any questions, I am willing to answer them. Thank you.
And thank you, Gabriel, and Diana, for your very fine interpretation. Thank you for that. Gabriel, there were just so many ways that I was seeing parallels and similarities between your stories and the conversation that we had with Cami just a few minutes earlier. So I have a few questions coming in, and both Gabriel and Cami are inviting your questions. Remember, if you're on Facebook, please use the comment section, and on Zoom, there is a Q&A for you to submit your questions. I can't help but noting one of the similarities. Both of you talked, especially at the end, Gabriel, you talked about reforestation, using native species, and how important that is for water retention, preventing runoff and erosion. I'd invite both of you to say a little bit more about the importance of native species in your respective communities. In Bolivia, why don't we start with you, Gabriel, and then come back to you, Cami, especially around this water retention question that you both focused on. Gabriel?
We have seen and experienced, because I come from an indigenous community. And in my community, there are knowledges, even they date back from the Incas, our grandparents, our ancestors. They have been working and keeping what we call the native plants. There are many native plants in that zone, medicinal plants. You can go there and it is like being to a live pharmacy. So it is very important to work in this aspect, which is not only for medicinal purpose, but it also serves as a mattress, something that is alive, a matter that retains water. And if you know about biology, you know that this ensures that this works because the subsoil has holes, cave, where the water is accumulated. And farther below, we find the water springs. And that is where the water infiltrates during the rainy season. And that is the point. In this area of Lujo, our idea is not to forest 100% with foreign plants, such as radiata pine, but to allow also for native plants from the place to develop, because they have lived there thousands and thousands of years, but pine is an alternative. So the farmers express in their language, Quechua, they say we will blend them. The pine will later be used as wood, but the native plants, they will continue to exist. We will not isolate them. We will not send them aside, because that is their home. That is why I always say in many spaces with MCC that the voice of the farmer is the one that should be listened to. There is a whole lot of experience for sure. There are events in which we will see, for example, Lujo. It will be nice to be there. What I hear from this community is wonderful. It is a place in Bolivia from where an environmental policy must be born. That may be my answer regarding native plants. Yeah.
Well, Gabriel, for me at least, you've opened up a number of other questions, but I want to come back to you again about ancestral knowledge. You've talked about that a little bit. But Cami, can you say a little more about why native species as we pay so much attention to water runoff?
Sure. So in the United States and in Lancaster, Pennsylvania in particular, we have a lot of farmland, and farmers often put a lot of nutrients on those crops, phosphorus to get them to grow, and nitrogen. And then when it rains, it runs off and goes into our streams. So if you plant trees along the streams, which would be called a riparian buffer, it can capture all that runoff, and the trees will use those nutrients like the phosphorus and take it up and capture that so it doesn't get into our waterways. Because once it enters the waterways, it can go all the way down to the ocean, and that's how we get these algal blooms that end up creating these dead zones. It's also the importance, though, for planting native plants along riparian buffers. Especially in Pennsylvania, we have deciduous trees and they lose their leaves. And when they lose the leaves, they start to create this mat on the floor, and also the leaves go into the stream. The fungi and the bacteria that we have has actually co-evolved with those leaves, so they break them down and they eat the leaves, and then the insects can eat the leaves. If it's something foreign like bamboo, the leaves actually will not break down because the fungi doesn't really recognize it, and they just keep building up and create this really deep layer on the bottom of the forest that is just impermeable. So picking native plants is really good because everything's kind of interlinked and co-evolved. And then also the trees support a lot of caterpillars for the birds and a lot of insects for the bats. So native is just a really good choice, just because it brings the entire ecosystem together and keeps the ecosystem functioning in these small pockets of riparian buffers along vast farmland.
You know, Cami, we feed birds here in Ontario, but it's fascinating to listen to you and realize that, yeah, feeding the birds starts long before we put, you know, corn and sunflowers out in the bird feeder here. So being kind to fungi is actually part of what we're doing at the sort of beginning end of the food chain when we plant native species. Hey, I want to pick up on this ancestral knowledge with both of you, Cami and Gabrielle. And Gabrielle's talked about it already, but Cami, you didn't as much. But I'm wondering if, you know, we tend to associate ancestral knowledge. Often we think of indigenous communities as being the places where that's held. But how about there in Lancaster County? Who are the people that, you know, not necessarily in universities, but in other spaces and places and communities, are there ancestral knowledge sources that that we can be paying attention to here in the US and Canada as well?
So I would say from like a forager type perspective, I forage for food, native fruits, vegetables, fungi. And I've met a lot of people who are really connected to the land and have been here for centuries. We kind of do have a very short, what I would say, ancestral history, because when you're looking at the entire world, the United States is actually fairly young as far as Pennsylvania is concerned, and settlers. But there was, you know, people here before us that passed down some knowledge on as far as foraging and I know the Susquehanna River has a lot of pawpaw trees, and there's a huge connection with the pawpaw trees and foraging and the river. But I don't have a whole lot of knowledge personally. So.
Well, it sounds like you're committed to deepening that if you're as involved in foraging as you are. I'm going to go back to you, Gabrielle, and as I ask you a question about ancestral knowledge, I want to note for people in the chat, those of you on Zoom at least, there's a link there the first-person story that I mentioned earlier in MCC's A Common Place. So, Gabriel, you've talked a lot about ancestral knowledge, and MCC is partnering directly with Prodi, where you work. So we don't necessarily bring ancestral knowledge, but I think at our best, we try to bring a variety of techniques that blend well with and that we try to take seriously alongside of ancestral knowledge. Can you talk about how we work not to clash, but to integrate or to work well together and balance various more contemporary methods with some of the ancestral methods that you've spoken about?
Ya, a ver, referente a
Yeah,
conocimiento
regarding ancestral knowledge, I always talk about transference. Our grandparents have told us that there has been a lot of knowledge. Our grandparents have talked to us. In the regular education, we have been taught about colonization, but even before the colony, there were already techniques, technologies, ancestral knowledges, and practices. These techniques used to preserve a lot the soil. There are small traces, very small, of wall terraces, not bigger than our hand, but they are still in place. These were the knowledge that they used. In the same way, they would care very, very well for the environment, what we call Pachamama. I remember that my grandfather would tell us, there you have two very big mountains, one on the left with a lot of grass, another on the right side, and they would say with that knowledge, no animal can access this mountain this year. Why? Because we need this mountain to regenerate. We need the seeds to be sown naturally. But this other one that has been already recovered, there we can graze our animals. It was a knowledge that didn't allow deforestation to happen, for pastures to be lost, as it is the case today. So, regarding the communities in the ancestral knowledge, they used to help each other. There was collaboration, reciprocity. I help you, you help me. It's what we call Aini. Aini means you help me, I help you. We do our crops together, and it is faster that way, in fraternity. We have also mingas. Help me that I will help you. It was a knowledge, a wisdom that we did not forget. And in that way, that ruled everything. And there was good coexistence. It is similar regarding medicine. They knew how to cure any disease. All of the territory of North of Potosí is a place where there is a great variety of medicinal native plants to treat respiratory illnesses, or when somebody has a strained foot or a broken bone. They knew how to treat that because they had great knowledge. It is the same in the aspect of food, because in the ancestral knowledge, they cultivated potato, a very important crop, from the highlands of the north of Potosí. They had many potato varieties, and those knowledges thus far, they continue to practice, but they do not practice them as they used to. Later, in the 1950s, with the Green Revolution and machinery arriving, the situation changed. The technology and agrochemicals came and they displaced the ancestral knowledge. But today we are rethinking and saying in the workshops that I have mentioned in the presentation, what can we do? We are no longer able to live without technology, without some of the things that colony brought. But we cannot live either only with the ancestral knowledge. So in an MCC visit, the staff heard that we need to blend the two knowledges and to get a new understanding. So communities are working in this sense because they don't say that one way or the other is bad. It is already a part of the culture, of our culture in our communities. What has come from technology, but we need to take advantage without forgetting the ancestral knowledge and the practices, because that has been around for years. It has been alive for thousands of years. One foreign plant, you plant it and it needs to be watered many times. But on the contrary, one plant that has been born and it is native to the place, even if you do not water it even once, it keeps on living. And I think that is the ancestral knowledge that exists within the indigenous or the originary farming communities, as the Bolivian Constitution recognizes.
I really like the example of the hardiness of native plants that don't need the same water sources as imported plants. Hey, there's a few other questions coming in, and a comment that I want to share. Someone said Indigenous people have a lot of good knowledge regarding good practices with nature. So a response, I think, to some of what you've been sharing, Gabriel. There's a question for you, Cami, has come in. People noticed in our introduction that you have a project that you're doing at Hope United Methodist Church, and someone would like to know more about that project. Can you tell us more, Cami?
Sure, I'd love to. So the project at Hope Church, it's 2.5 acres of native plants. It's a meadow, so it's kind of messy. We chose specific plants that butterflies use, and we have a whole lot of different projects going on there. There's also a Facebook page where I post events, but I also highlight different native plants as they're blooming in the meadow. It is open to the public, so if you're nearby or on vacation, you could come visit the meadow. I'm also very happy to give tours. If you just happen to be in the area, if you shoot me a message over Facebook, I've arranged a lot of meetups at the church to talk about native plants there. It was a Pennsylvania Master Naturalist project, and it was my capstone project, and we installed it about 3 years ago. We did a seed mix, and we also planted seedlings of native plants, and we're just hitting year 4. This is summer 4. And so the flowers are really starting to come in. For the most part, it's native plants. We do have a few invasives that have crept in, and we try to keep control of those. But feel free to look up Hope Meadow on Facebook and just shoot me a message if you have questions. There's also another MCC presentation. It's about an hour long on how I did it. And I could actually probably get that in the comments for the person if they would like to know the nitty gritty details on the entire process, because it's a lot.
So Cami, if I showed up last week in May, what would stand out in the meadow?
Oh, in May? Right now, we really only have golden Alexanders blooming. It's pretty green. Our peak bloom time is going to be the end of June and into July. So that's when you're going to get the cone flowers and the sunflowers. And then we do have a pretty spectacular array of fall flowers also, some asters. We also do monarch tagging events for adults and children. It's kind of geared towards kids, but adults love it also. And if you don't know what that is, we put a tag on the monarchs with a serial number, And so when they migrate to Mexico, we can see how far they're going if they make it, and get some data and some information on their paths that they're traveling. So that way we can plant nectar plants and host plants for them on their journey, so they have them, so they can make it, to kind of boost the population. So we have all kinds of events like that in the meadow. We do a water week event also, where we talk about water and the importance of native plants and retaining water. Wow.
Hey, I want to pick up on your butterfly comment. There's a question here about bees, and there was a, I'm going to have the question for both of you. I noticed, Gabrielle, you talked a little bit about some backyard bee projects. We hear a lot here in Canada and the US about a declining pollinator population. Why don't we start with you, Cami? What more would you want to say about the kind of work you do, or that we could do, that would be bee positive, pollinator positive?
Sure. So at least in the United States, the one thing you have to make a distinction between is the honeybees that we use to pollinate crops are actually European honeybees. They are not native. Our native bees are the ones that are in decline. So our bumblebees, they usually have colonies that are very small, 17 to 20 individuals. Some actually are individuals and they don't live in a colony. So they often live in these messy meadows and these grasslands. Hope Meadow has 2 endangered species of bumblebees at it, and we maintain the grasses for them. So by planting the native plants and allowing the grasses to grow up, you really create that habitat for those native bumblebees that they need. If you are creating a meadow and your goal is to help specifically bumblebees, I would recommend that you do not put in a honeybee hive, because this creates competition for resources for those native bees. But if you have like an orchard or something, they're not going to hurt the bumblebee population if you're using them in farming or just for honey at your house, that kind of thing. It's when you're really trying to create that habitat for those native bees, and then the competition. Just planting native plants, nectar plants are really good. So anything that's flowering, and then just those grasses, having a grassy area. And if you live in a more a neighborhood that you have to have things a little bit neat, maybe there's like a kind of hidden place in your backyard where you can just let the grass grow up. That will provide habitat. Or if you have like a log that you can lay in your backyard somewhere, they'll live in the log and in the wood. There are some bee houses for native bees that are basically like logs with holes drilled in them. They will use those, and they're not unsightly or anything. So normally you won't upset your neighbors too much.
You're really paying attention to our neighbors for us, Cami. Thank you.
Yes.
Gabrielle, I want to come back to you with the bee question that someone gave us here. Can you say more about the importance of bees and pollinators, and maybe how that connects to ancestral knowledge as well?
Well, apiculture is becoming very, very important in Bolivia. There is growth in different departments. Africanized bee has migrated from Brazil, also the Italian one. But in the north of Potosí, we had always bees, native, from 3 to 4 varieties or species that I know of, where they were not always there, but today we don't see them a lot as before. But many people has undertaken this business because of the economic benefits of honey. But at the same time, they are becoming aware of bees as a pollinating agents that help a lot in the survival of plant biodiversity. We can say that I raise them to many ends. Medicinal ends. We have even treated an old lady who had arthritis with the bee sting. Later in this pandemic time, people has been using honey as a high value product to defend themselves from COVID somehow. So our reflection must lead us to think that we need to multiply bees. Why? Well, because bees are one of the most pollinating species, and since we are establishing in the Lujo community the MIC, we will need some species such as native plants, among others, that will need someone to pollinate them. And in the same way, in the productive spaces, we are starting to produce apple, peach, and other fruit trees. In the lower lands where we work with MCC as well, we have custard apple, oranges. We need bees to help with pollination itself. So I always say, let's save the world. How? Through what? Well, we are going to save it through bees. Somebody said, if in the world bees were to disappear, what would be of the world then? I think that we wouldn't have many years left. So we depend on bees a lot. So if there are no bees, I don't know what will happen. We see in social media that bees are dying due to agrochemicals. We do not see a lot of that here in north of Potosí. But it is a nice experience to work with bees. People say that they sting, but there are ways to treat that. But in the communities, people are already raising them. Not in a very technical way. It is more in a rustic way, in pitchers, holes, logs. Well, that's that.
Gabrielle, thank you. That's a very inspiring message about the importance of bees globally. There's another question coming in for you, Gabrielle. This is taking us right back to the climate change question. Someone is saying, how have you seen climate change affect the attitudes of farmers? How have you seen climate change affect the attitudes of farmers?
Yes, talking about climate change, when we talk about climate change, it should be something positive, the word change. So I think that it is misnamed climate change because it is actually an unaffordable balance in the climate on the globe, but that's what we call it. The perception of producers in North Potosí, how do they see it? We always ask, and surely Nathan and Lady have likely heard directly from the farmers that climate change has been favorable, but it has also been unfavorable. There is not one only opinion. So in a community in Calachaca, there is a producer called Luis Mamani. And he says, before, when I was a child, here in my community, we only produce potato. Only potato, native potatoes. Only that one. So climate change has brought with it fava bean, corn, and many crops. So they think that it has been a good thing, according to farmers here. But on the other side, climate change brought hail, it brought freeze, it brought drought. It is something that I had never heard in all these years in the communities. Climate change is always talked about as something negative. something unpleasant. But when a farmer thinks about it that way, it makes us wonder, what should we do regarding this? So, from foresting areas like that Cami is doing in the USA, as well as what we are doing in this community, foresting, reforesting with native species or foreign ones, those are the ideas and politics of the producers of the communities. I have also seen that in La Paz, at the other side of La Paz, we have a rainforest. Now that is without trees. There is no longer snow in the mountains that used to have it. There is no longer water in La Paz, so we have a lot to think about. I would hope that in Bolivia, policies be formulated for afforestation, reforestation, and to contribute with something. As farmers say, Pachamama has given us everything, and we need to give it something back with this topic of reforestation, repopulation of native plants, mainly them, because they are going to live for years. That is what I think regarding climate change in the north. Maybe in Santa Cruz, the lowland is different, but this is what producers are mentioning in the north of Potosí. It is for sure one more challenge to address for MCC, for Prodi, for everyone, for the producers, for the municipality, for the authorities, for everyone. Because this is a task for all of us with both responsibility and co-responsibility.
Gabrielle, thank you. It's just very helpful to get a glimpse into some of the tensions that you at Prodi and we through MCC. You mentioned Nathan and Lady, our Bolivia reps there for MCC. Thank you for the insight and the deep knowledge, the ancestral knowledge that you carry and shared with us tonight. We're at the top of the hour here, so I also want to add my thanks to you, Cami. You were functioning in a very different part of the world, but as we noted and some of the questioners noted, there's lots of parallels, and you remind us of some of the things that we can do to respond to and to work towards a healthy Earth, the home that's been created for us. So thank you both. Thank you all for joining tonight, for your questions. Diana, thank you for your interpretation, and I hope that was a good experience for you no matter what language you were listening in tonight. We want to let you know that in addition to these webinars, we also do a podcast called Relief Development and Podcast. It's available wherever you find your podcasts. There was a new episode last week where we're talking about climate change and agriculture in Haiti. We also talk about some of the other pressures that people are feeling in that context. So if you need something to listen to on your walk or your commute, please have a listen to Relief, Development, and Podcast. Again, thank you very kindly for joining us. Thank you for your ongoing engagement with Mennonite Central Committee as we share God's love and compassion with all in the name of Christ. Thank you again for joining us. See you next time.